Let's face it, kids are creepy in horror games. If you take a look at some of the biggest horror game franchises out there, there's usually one or two creepy kids that appear at some point to send a shiver up your spine. And on this episode of Nerd Space Games, we'll be taking a look at the creepiest kids seen in horror games. Before that though, know that I won't be including babies or fetuses on today's video. Believe it or not, there's a whole separate video that I can do on that topic alone. I know, crazy, right? Also, I'm focusing on kids that at least still look human. For example, ghosts and BOWs are acceptable on a list like this. However, I won't be including entries like the Great Children in Silent Hill or the Pack in Dead Space 2. By the way, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and this is my top 10 creepiest kids in horror games. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Eerie Worlds. Are you a big fan of collectible card games that can be extremely addicting? Are you like me and you're a fan of mythical creatures and monsters from urban legends all over the world like Bigfoot and Mothman? Well then, I have just the game for you. Eerie Worlds is a collectible card game where you bring hordes of iconic creatures from folklore together to form alliances and defeat your enemies. On a regular basis, new monsters will be released, which means you'll never run out of new and creative creatures to recruit to your alliance. Build a deck that you could annihilate any and all enemies in your path by recruiting new monsters, and even fuse some of your creatures together to make even more powerful monsters for your deck. Outside of the really addicting game itself, each monster card features in-depth descriptions that provides a little more insight on some of the biggest urban legends across the globe. I'm obsessed with the amount of mythical creatures that appear in the Eerie Worlds, but if I had to pick one monster that I hope is introduced in the near future, it's gotta be the Basilisk. For those of you guys that don't know, the Basilisk is a giant snake that has the ability to petrify anybody that meets its gaze. I feel like it would be a perfect fit for Eerie Worlds. Anyway, join the war, recruit mythical monsters, and create a deck that will strike fear into the hearts of your enemies by downloading Eerie Worlds today. The link is in the description of today's video. Oh, and while you're at it, let them know in the comments down below what your favorite mythical creature of folklore is. Anyway, back to today's video. Number 10, Alessa Gillespie, Silent Hill Origins. So while Silent Hill Origins isn't as good as the first game of the franchise and it does ruin the lore a bit, I don't think the game is all that bad. And when considering which kid in Silent Hill is the creepiest, I can't think of anybody more terrifying than Alessa Gillespie of Silent Hill Origins. While she's an adult in the original game, in Origins we go back to when Alessa nearly died in the fire when she was 7 years old. Despite nearly dying and being saved by Travis, Alessa still retained most of her abilities, hence why we see the town of Silent Hill thrown into the fog world and the nightmare reality that we are so familiar with thanks to previous games. Throughout that game, Alessa pops up at random times, which makes us a bit uneasy every time she is on screen. However, it's what she's capable of that makes her terrifying. See, Alessa has the ability to bring the town of Silent Hill into a nightmare reality in which her worst fears come to life in the form of a dangerous creature roaming the streets. Knowing that every single terrifying creature that we face off against is created from this psychic little girl, Alessa definitely deserves a spot in the top 10 creepiest kids in horror games. Number 9, Little Sisters, Bioshock. The Little Sisters in Bioshock are some of the most adorable yet terrifying looking little girls seen in horror games. While they may take the appearance of a small girl that makes you want to adopt them right away, as you get closer to them, you'll notice that these girls have been altered in a way that gives them this creepy yellow glow in their eyes. While these girls are harmless to the player, it's their guardian angel that really pose a major threat. Piss off one of these little sisters by getting close to them or harming them, and they'll immediately alert their nearby Big Daddy to come and save the day. Between the control that they have over their robotic guardian, the creepy sounds they make as you're exploring Rapture, and how creepy they look, Little Sisters are some of the scariest and creepiest kids seen in a horror game. With that being said, you can't help but feel for them considering that they were once normal little girls, kidnapped from their families and turned into harvesters, all for the pursuit of the valuable resource known as Adam. Number 8, Tomoko Maeda, Forbidden Siren. 14-year-old Tomoko Maeda is an easily forgettable character thanks to her being in the game that's sadly extremely underrated, Forbidden Siren. Developed by the original creator of Silent Hill, Forbidden Siren is one of the most unique horror games out there thanks to the mind hacking ability that allows the player to hack the minds of nearby enemies and see what they see. And out of the 10 playable characters of the game, the one with the most shocking and interesting story is Tomoko Maeda. Warning, I'm about to jump into spoilers here, but Tomoko isn't exactly creepy right away. In fact, it's one single sequence in her story that hits hard enough to earn herself a spot on a list like this. See, at the end of Tomoko's story, we follow her as she heads towards the church that her parents are at. Finding them sleeping inside, she begins to bang on the window to get their attention to let her in. We switch over to the parents' point of view and see one of the most shocking reveals of the game. Tomoko is dead, and she actually became a Shibito, one of the undead parasite-like beings within the village. From her parents' point of view, we see Tomoko bleeding from her eyes as she has a creepy voice and continues to bang on the window to get their attention. And unfortunately, we basically learn the fate of her parents as well when we see a scene later in the game that shows us all three of them as Shibito.
Mommy, let me in! Mommy!
Tomoko!
Number 7. Amanda Rural Rose. There's an argument that could be made that almost every member of the Red Crown Aristocrats Club from Rural Rose deserves a spot somewhere on today's list. So, to avoid half of this list being made up with this club alone, I decided to pick out the creepiest one of the bunch, Amanda. While Wendy is easily the most dangerous and Diana is the most intimidating, neither one of these girls are as creepy as Amanda. As the lowest ranking member outside of Jennifer, Amanda is usually bullied by the rest of the club members. That is until Jennifer shows up and is recruited by the club. Because of this, Amanda becomes extremely happy about Jennifer's arrival due to the fact that she's no longer the target and is the lowest ranking member. This is why Amanda gets a weird kick out of touching Jennifer with a dead rat on a stick as punishment for bringing the worst gift. However, over time, Jennifer eventually ranks up and Amanda once again falls to the bottom of the rankings. This is where Amanda gets extremely disturbing as we can see her personality change when she becomes aggressive in her hate towards Jennifer, that she makes a puppet that looks like Jennifer and beats the hell out of it, pretending that she's beating Jennifer. In a game full of monsters and creatures created from traumatic events in Jennifer's past, Amanda somehow manages to be one of the most unnerving and disturbing characters of the game. Number 6. Sachiko, Corpse Party. At the start of Corpse Party, thanks to one of the main characters moving away soon, 9 friends perform a ritual called Sachiko Ever After. This spell is to act as a charm that, if performed correctly, would keep everybody connected to each other for all eternity. As you would expect from a horror game though, the spell fails and what follows is an encounter with dangerous ghosts around every corner. Yet the most terrifying ghost of them all is Sachiko herself. Spoilers for Corpse Party, but the game reveals that one of the ghost children in Corpse Party, Sachiko, has in fact been dead for far longer than every other ghost in this game. In fact, she's responsible for the death of most of the ghosts in this game, including the 3 other creepy kids roaming the halls of this school. I won't dive too much into lore details, but Sachiko is essentially a spirit created from revenge. She was killed after witnessing the tragic death of her mother, and since then she tortured and killed innocent people. Probably the most tragic and brutal kill comes from her attack on the 3 ghost children in this school. She brutally tortured each of them, cut out their tongues, and went on a stabbing frenzy before finishing them off. And instead of allowing them to move on in the afterlife, she trapped them in Heavenly Host Elementary School and forced them to torture and murder other people that arrive in this alternate dimension. The sequence in which Ayumi experiences the 3 murders firsthand is easily one of the most terrifying and brutal moments of the entire game. Sachiko, while a tragic villain due to her backstory, is absolutely terrifying in this scene. Number 5. Sai, Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. Sai is the main antagonist of Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly, and she's arguably one of the most terrifying parts of the game as well. After a failed ritual in Fatal Frame 2 prior to the events of the story, Sai has now become corrupted and is being used to fill the rest of the village with haunted spirits and dark entities. Every time Sai is on screen, she's absolutely horrifying. Rather, it's the hide-and-seek instant kill stalker sequence in which she tries to manipulate Mio, or it's the scene in which she is surrounded by dead bodies and continues to laugh constantly. Sai definitely makes her mark as one of the scariest parts of one of the most terrifying games out there. Number 4. Bobby Barrows, Clock Tower. Not gonna lie, before Clock Tower Rewind came out, it's been decades since the last time I played the original Clock Tower. And after all of this time, I didn't remember Bobby being a kid. Then after revisiting the story with Clock Tower Rewind, I find out that one of the first iconic stalker enemies in a horror game is in fact a 9-year-old boy. That's right, the infamous Scissors Man is actually a little kid that chases after Jennifer throughout the Clock Tower mansion. And as you guys already know with my scariest stalker enemies video on my channel, which by the way, if you haven't watched that, go check that out, I find Scissors Man to be one of the most terrifying stalker enemies of all time. Now sure, nowadays, he might not seem that scary thanks to the outdated 16-bit point-and-click slow-moving gameplay mechanics of the original Clock Tower. But when the game first came out, it was absolutely horrifying to face off against this guy. He would literally pop up in the most unpredictable moments of the story. I mean, he would cut through the ceiling, bust through doors, and even pop out of boxes when you least expect it. Since he pretty much instantly killed the player if he catches you, each time he arrived, our hearts literally dropped as we had to react quickly or risk meeting a grim fate courtesy of his giant-ass pair of scissors. Number 3. Eveline, Resident Evil 7. Codename E001, Eve was basically a prototype BOW engineered by a secret and mysterious organization called The Connections. While little is known about this organization, we do know that Mother Miranda was on their team for a while, in which she was the one to provide them with samples of the Megamycete and DNA from her deceased daughter, Eva. After years of experimentation, Eveline was created. While on her own, Eve is nowhere near as terrifying as some of the other characters in RE7, but she's still the one behind turning each and every one of them into the monsters that we face off against. With her abilities, Eve is able to resurrect the dead, as seen with Ethan Winters, and turn them into molded creatures. We don't 100% understand the extent of Eve's powers, but from what we saw from her in Resident Evil 7, she's extremely dangerous and terrifying. From the scare factor side of things, Eve uses her abilities to turn Mia into some sort of exorcist-like character straight out of a horror movie. Thanks to the Eve that we see throughout the game being mostly a hallucination, she's able to teleport all over the Baker estate and perform some of the creepiest jump scares as well. Her constant teasing and laughing is also enough to make us nervous throughout the entire game. Despite being a bioweapon created to end wars quickly, Eveline is also a pretty tragic character that just wants a family to call her own. Unfortunately, perhaps due to her having the mind of a 10-year-old girl and being raised in a lab for most of her life, she goes about it in the most disturbing and horrifying way possible.
Lucas and I are going to have a look around and see if the storm did any damage. You two should have a look around the house.
That's a good idea, Jack. You remember the last hurricane? We thought we were lucky, and the next time it rained, there was a mess for sure.
Hello, sister.
Number 2, the Kiryu Twins, F.E.A.R 2, Crimson Butterfly. Normally, I try to keep videos like this focused on one entry per franchise, but in the case of F.E.A.R 2, a game that primarily centers around twin boys and girls being sacrificed, I couldn't avoid including both the Kiryu Twins and Sai on today's list. Regardless, the Kiryu Twins are definitely the scariest characters in F.E.A.R 2, and honestly, I would totally understand if you believe that they deserve the number 1 spot. As you would expect from twins that appear in F.E.A.R 2, Azami and Akane Kiryu were previous victims of the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual. Per this ritual, the twin Tri-Maidens were to perform a sacrifice in which the younger twin must strangle the older twin to keep the dark entities at bay. And unfortunately, after such a traumatic experience, the surviving twin Akane left the sacrifice with serious trauma that left her unable to carry on in her everyday life. In a way to help her move on past this trauma, her father created a doll in the likeness of her deceased sister. Akane, already guilt-ridden from killing her sister, began to believe that the doll was her deceased sister, Azami, to the point where it allowed an evil spirit to possess her. This led to the doll's spirit manipulating Akane to the point where it convinced her to murder her own father. During the events of the main story of F.E.A.R 2, we see both Akane and the evil doll version of her sister pop up on multiple occasions to attack Mio. Since one of them is merely a doll, Mio can only damage the real twin, Akane, and therefore the player will find themselves in quite a dire situation each time these creepy twins appear on screen with their creepy ass giggles. Number 1, Alma Wade, F.E.A.R. Before diving deep into why Alma is the creepiest kid seen in a horror game, we first need to address the elephant in the room. Technically speaking, Alma Wade is actually an adult throughout most of the F.E.A.R games. Since she officially dies at the age of 26, there's an argument that could be made that she isn't really qualified for a list like this. Still, after going back and forth on it, I can't ignore a character like Alma Wade when making the list for scariest kids in horror games, even if the younger version of her is mostly in the form of hallucinations created from her older self. Regardless, Alma Wade is without a doubt the scariest part about F.E.A.R, and when her younger form is on screen, the player is usually absolutely terrified. Diving into the lore behind Alma Wade, she was a child born with psychic abilities to a scientist, Harlan Wade. After recognizing her abilities, Wade began experimenting on her with the help of Armacham Corporation when Alma was only 5 years old. After her ability led to the death of an employee, Alma was put into a coma when she was only 7 years old. This could be why Alma appears as a young girl for most of the game, as it's the appearance that she remembers having prior to being put into a coma. I won't dive too much into the rest of her backstory as it could take up a whole video by itself, but essentially while Alma is killed at the age of 26 by the corporation for fear of her abilities, her spirit lives on. And it's that spirit that haunts the main character of F.E.A.R, the Point Man. Throughout the game, Alma Wade would laugh, cry, whisper, teleport, and pop up in the most unpredictable moments of the game that would lead to some of the best jump scares ever experienced in a horror game. Add that to the constant presence throughout the game, which provides an uneasy feeling for the player consistently, and there's no wonder why Alma Wade claims the title for scariest kid in a horror game. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Alma Wade the creepiest kid in a horror game, or is there someone else that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Also, don't forget to let me know if I miss any other creepy kids in horror games. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you really enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.